All right, let's talk about something that feels absolutely amazing, but is, believe it or not, one of the biggest risks you'll ever face. And that's winning. Yeah, I know it sounds completely backward, but it turns out your biggest successes might just be setting you up for your most spectacular failures. So let's get right into it.
You know the feeling, right? Maybe it's a string of successes at work, a few great trades in a row, or even just one of those weeks where literally everything you touch turns to gold. You start to feel unstoppable, like you finally cracked the code. Well, that feeling, that's the bait.
And this quote just hits the nail on the head. This is the core of what we're talking about today. The real paradox is that the exact moment you feel like you can't possibly lose is precisely when you're at the greatest risk. It isn't failure that lays the biggest traps for us. It's that intoxicating, addictive feeling of success.
So let's give it a name, the confidence trap. This is what happens when our brain gets confused and starts mixing up short-term luck with genuine, long-term skill. You know, we get a few wins under our belt, our ego puffs up, and before you know it, we've thrown the very rules that got us there right out the window. And that sets us up for a massive fall.
But why? Why is this trap so dang effective? What makes success so seductive that it can make smart people abandon all common sense? Well, to figure that out, we've got to look at what's happening inside our own heads. So it really comes down to biology. Every single time you win at anything, your brain gets this little hit of dopamine. It's that feel-good chemical. Now, a winning streak creates this really powerful feedback loop where your brain just starts craving that reward, pushing you, almost begging you to take more risks to get another hit. And that is what starts to cloud your judgment.
You've probably heard of the gambler's fallacy, right? It's that mistaken belief that if you lose a whole bunch of times, you're somehow due for a win. But the confidence trap? Well, it's like its more dangerous, evil twin. It's the belief that because you've been winning, the streak has to continue. It makes us think that success somehow predicts more success, and that is a fatal assumption. And all of this leads to a pretty predictable and honestly destructive cycle. It always starts with a simple winning streak. Then that success inflates our ego. We get convinced of our own genius. Then, feeling bulletproof, we abandon our discipline, our rules, our strategy, the whole thing. And that almost inevitably leads to that one single devastating loss, or a string of them that just wipes everything out.
So right now, you might be thinking, okay, but hold on. My wins weren't random. That was all skill. And hey, maybe it was. But let's move on to the hard numbers and see how even a really impressive short-term winning streak is very often just a statistical illusion.
Let me ask you a simple question. If you get heads 5 times in a row, does that prove you're some kind of coin-flipping prodigy? Of course not, right? We all just know, intuitively, that's just luck. That's a random outcome. But what's so funny is that when it comes to our own work or our own investments, we are so quick to believe we have a special skill, even when the sample size is just as tiny. You know, the actual probability of getting 5 heads in a row is only about 3%. So yeah, it's unlikely, but it's not a miracle. It's a completely normal, expected part of random chance. A winning streak of 5 trades, 5 successful sales calls, or 5 great days can be exactly the same. Just a statistical blip on the radar.
And this chart illustrates that perfectly. This is what we call expected variance. So imagine a professional with a true, consistent 65% success rate. That person should expect to have incredible weeks where they hit 80% and also some pretty terrible weeks where they drop down to 50%. It doesn't mean their skills suddenly changed. It's just noise. The real trap is believing that 80% week is the new normal.
Okay, so the theory is one thing, but the consequences, they are very, very real. Let's look at a couple of quick case studies to see how this psychological flaw actually plays out and destroys real progress. Okay, first up, let's talk about Michael. Michael was a super disciplined trader. He had a solid strategy, really strict risk management. He was doing everything right. But then he hit a remarkable winning streak that made him feel like he'd finally cracked the code. So get this. His account grew by 22% after winning 12 out of just 13 trades. Can you even imagine how that feels? He felt totally invincible. He thought he couldn't lose. And so he decided it was time to maximize this hot period. And here's the result. Because he massively increased his risk, a few normal losses didn't just wipe out his 22% gain, they took an additional 8% of his original capital with it. That's a 30% swing from his peak, all because he abandoned his rules in a moment of hubris. And the cruelest irony? His strategy was totally fine. The market just did what markets do. Next is Sarah. Her strategy was pretty conservative. She'd make just a few high-quality trades a day, only during optimal conditions. But after one great week, she started seeing patterns everywhere. She went from making 3 or 4 disciplined trades to 12 to 15 impulsive ones, trading at all hours of the day. She completely abandoned her edge, and within 2 weeks, she'd lost 3 entire months of profit.
So we've seen the danger. It's clear, it's real, and it is absolutely destructive. But the good news is it's avoidable. So let's explore the antidote. Let's look at the disciplined rules that professionals use to protect themselves from, well, themselves.
So how do you actually avoid this trap? Well, professionals know that willpower always fails, so they rely on systems. First, they maintain absolute consistency in their risk. This means they never let a hot streak convince them to bet bigger. It's a non-negotiable rule. It just takes ego right out of the equation. Next, they often have a maximum daily activity limit. This acts like a circuit breaker, right? It stops that dopamine-fueled chase for more and more wins that leads to sloppy decisions. They also keep a detailed journal. Now why? Because your memory is a total liar. A journal forces you to look at cold, hard data. It helps you separate what was a good strategy from what was just a lucky break. And maybe the most important rule of all, they evaluate themselves based on their process, not their short-term results. See, you can follow your plan perfectly and still lose, or you can break all the rules and get lucky. The professional only cares about what they can control, executing their process flawlessly.
And all this brings us to a really crucial point. The path to long-term sustainable success, it isn't about learning how to win. It's about learning how to survive winning. It's a huge paradox, but it is the absolute truth.
Once you've developed a skill or a strategy that actually works, the whole game changes. Your biggest threat is no longer the market or the competition or even just bad luck. It's your own mind. The most critical battle you will ever fight is the one against your own ego when things are going great.
So in the end, it really comes down to this choice. On one shoulder, you've got the seductive whisper of confidence, telling you, go on, increase your risk, you've mastered this. But on the other shoulder, you have the quiet, steady voice of humility, reminding you to maintain your discipline, that your wins could just be luck, and to stick to your process. The professionals learn to listen to that second voice.
And that's the question I really want to leave you with today. As you go about your work, your projects, your life, just ask yourself this. Is your confidence coming from a recent string of wins, which could just be random chance, or is it built on a solid, repeatable process that you stick to no matter what, win or lose? Because the answer to that question could be the difference between a short-lived streak and truly lasting success. Thanks for tuning in.